Okay. Again, I seem to have quite a few things I want to say today, so bear with me. I think of Padmasambhava. Well, he's a magician figure, but I also think of him as a boundary crosser. He's a very adventurous spirit, and he moves into all sorts of different realms. He always moves towards other beings and engages them, subdues them, converts them, converses with them, or even shows them respect. So he's always moving across borders and boundaries into different realms. So there's another figure that I'm very fond of, this time from ancient Greece, who does the same thing in terms of moving across borders. I mentioned him a few days ago, and that's Hermes, who the Romans called Mercury. Sorry? Hermes. So, he was. So the other name is Mercury. So when you have words like, mercurial would be one thing, but merchant and commerce and things like that all have his name in them, and they're all to do with moving things across, exchange. He's a god of edges and borders and journeys. And interestingly, he has a brother called Apollo, who is the god of rules and orders and beauty in the sun. So Apollo finds Hermes very vexing, because Hermes will not stick to any of the rules. It's not because he's bad, it's just he doesn't even recognise that the rule is there. So he's a terrible one for stealing things, because he doesn't recognise possession and ownership. He doesn't recognise the borders of mine. So one of the symbols for Hermes is the wings in the earth, or coming out of the earth. So we got those on the shrine today, and actually in some ways we've also got another figure evoked, which is the phoenix arising out of the ashes. But that's just a happy coincidence. So in this exploration of metta and insight, we're going to just carry on looking at this whole area of crossing borders and boundaries. So every phenomena, and by phenomena I mean every experience, every arising experience, every phenomena is particular and unique. But to then say that it is singular with just one way to perceive it freezes it into death and eternity. That's a quote from Kaplinsky. It freezes things into death and eternity. William Blake also railed against a singular way of seeing things. He called it Newton's sleep, this single vision, that things are just one way. So in a way we've been touching on this area, well, most of the retreat actually, certainly for the past few days. So what we're trying to open up is a multiplicity of visions, a multiplicity of perspectives. So it's not as though to see the world as being made of beings and objects is wrong. It's just limited. It has consequences. It's very handy. That common sense perspective where you can utilise things and solve problems and plan. But it's also limited. It hides as much as it reveals. But the trouble is, just because something is helpful, we then think it must be true, the only true thing. So then science, maybe, the scientific worldview, because it's so successful, assumes it's absolutely true. So this single vision. And this, I think, is just a general human tendency. The tendency to create thingness out of experience, to reify it, to create things, and also the tendency to assert a trueness to views. So in Buddhism, we can explore how things are impermanent. They're not things. You get very excited. Oh yeah, it's not things, it's flow. Then we say, it's all flow, in a rather fixed way. Yeah. So we've made a thing out of flow. I mean, Buddhism's quite good at this, in the sense of there's emptiness. We go, oh, it's all empty. It's empty, yeah? It's empty. Lizzie's shaking her head. But emptiness is empty. Of emptiness, yeah? So Buddhism just keeps taking the ground that we try and create with thingifying things, just keeps kicking it out away from us. I mean, I found it very interesting the last few years. There's been a lot of emphasis on direct experience. It's all about direct experience, which is the bare phenomena, which is a really helpful way of seeing things. You know, in a way, just saying, what's the sort of like? Imagine there's a sort of essential, basic sensation below all the stories and the narratives. It's really helpful for undoing your stories and narratives. But then, direct experience becomes the thing that's more true than anything else. So you can't get it right, basically. Maybe we should just sort of agree with that. We can't get it right. It's very hard to hold to nothing whatever. But the other side of holding to nothing whatever is allowing everything whatsoever. There's a sort of fullness aspect to it. I'm just aware that one of the things, maybe my particular beef, the way we hold to things and views, is this privileging of our humanity. Like the privileging of our ego, we sort of take it for granted that humanity somehow placed at the centre of things. And I'd really like us to sort of challenge that a little bit. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and actually it was in a chapter meeting, and she was saying, I think this is related, we were discussing, she was talking about, I don't really know whether I've got a connection with my yidam, which is pranya paramita. It's like, am I just making it up? Am I making it all up? And so this is quite a common sort of theme for order members. Like, you have this yidam, you have this visualization, are you just making it up? Or how do you know it's real? And I just came back at her, it was a bit of a swerve ball. I just came back at her, well, maybe you're the thought of pranya paramita. Maybe she's making you up. So we just sit in an assumption of that we're creating our world, and in a way that's quite a that the mind creates the world is very much at the heart of Buddhist teaching, but that it's your mind creating the world, and what you mean by that, what you understand by that. Maybe you need to question. Is it the mind of Padmasambhava creating the world? Who knows? So this loosening things up, allowing a multiplicity of visions, I'd say this is very much to do with the realm of imagination. Yeah, I'd say that imagination is a faculty that allows us to move between different perspectives on experience, between different perceptions. So by imagination, I want to distinguish it from fantasy, because we don't, like in common parlance, imagination is just making it up. So fantasy, if we think of fantasy as more like the area of making it up, it's more kind of imposing a story or a narrative on something, or kind of getting into some sort of it is fancy, sort of in a way that's sort of kind of just a mental fabrication. It's sort of dislocated from the body. It's a sort of mental bubble. Where I'd say imagination is very much grounded or embedded in the body, or sort of released out of the body. Yeah. Talked about the heart maybe as a source of imagination, but we could talk about the body more generally. But then even to sort of say it's maybe something released out of the body or from the body, perhaps fixes the body a little bit. We could perhaps say it arises out of the psyche, which is less definable, less easy to pin down. Psyche was Greek word for soul. And of infinite depth, the aspect of us that has infinite depth. And traditionally, the sort of the part of our being that lies between physical matter and spirit. So that again, we're in the intermediary state. And by image, it doesn't need to be a visual image. It could be a word or an idea or another sense, tactile or auditory, a story or a single symbol. Something about communications from the depth. So maybe what it is that we tend to function with a sort of singular, dominant narrative which sees the world and us in a singular way, and other things can arise up if we listen that offer other doorways and other perspectives. So we can see a tree as a thing. This is a thing. We can see it as a living being. We can see it as an archetypal symbol, or a home for woodpeckers, or shade, or as a deity or spirit. So all of those things, any of those things. And you don't have to see it like that all at once, but more have that fluidity of mind. I wanted to say a bit about beauty at this point, and I think it's connected, but I haven't quite got I haven't quite got the connection, but there's something about the experience of beauty and the imagination. Maybe there's sort of like a free and relaxed mind and a free imagination. So, beauty is quite interesting. This whole kind about, well, where exactly does beauty lie? Some things, some objects seem to be inherently beautiful. People agree that they are beautiful. There's something about the object itself, that beauty lies in that. A particular person, or a particular work of art, or a particular piece of music, or a landscape. Even if you're in a grumpy mood, somehow it gets through. And then there's also... You're right, Leslie.
Just a big question mark. Isn't that cultural?
Isn't that cultural? Yes, it might be. It might be. Which then brings in the mind a bit as well. Well, yeah, it's complicated. I won't go into it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can.
That's why I try to comment.
Yeah. There's also the beauty that, I'm sure you've walked out of here after a meditation and it's just looked beautiful. And, on other days it hasn't. So beauty that's to do with the quality of our mind. Some days a leaky soy sauce bottle or a peeling bit of wallpaper can just be exquisitely beautiful. So sometimes this experience of beauty is in the thing. Sometimes it seems to be to do with the mind. And sometimes it seems to be to do with some sort of communication or reverberation or resonance between two, where somehow, just in a moment, it's as if a tree, maybe, or a flower offers itself a little bit more fully to you. And that affects your mind, which then allows it to be something more, which then affects your mind. So there's a sort of conversation that opens into beauty, which maybe starts with a two-ness and ends with a sort of non-dual experience. So we have beauty as this sort of, again, this unpin-downable quality that I've been talking about. Where does it lie? We don't need to even understand it as being one way. I quite like, again, going back to the ancient Greeks, they had a goddess, Aphrodite. So basically, the experience of beauty was when Aphrodite had illumined a particular person or object, which I quite like. Maybe she's there, maybe she's not. Suddenly, there's that illumination. There's the beauty. Okay, so I've been talking about singularity and multiplicity of vision. I've been talking about imagination as that faculty that allows this movement between visions. We've just touched a little bit on beauty, which again has this unpin-downable quality. Subject, object, it's not clear. But also in a way offers, suddenly something offers a different perspective, a different aspect of itself to you. I want to go on and just talk a little bit more about this, how the world appears to us. So, whenever we perceive anything, we can never know it for what it is. We can never know it for what it is, so objectively. So if you, if you take a daffodil here, and there it is in your experience, the recognition, this is a daffodil. That comes from you. That's not coming from the daffodil. The daffodil doesn't bother with that sort of thing. And its qualities, that it's this sort of creamy yellow, and the shape of them, the particular daffodil smell. It's not really a perfume, it's that particular smell. And that sense of beauty, they all arise in you as perceptions. But not everything in this perceptual situation is arising from or in you. That there is still something there, what we call a daffodil, which you're perceiving. But because you can only ever perceive that daffodil through your senses, you can only ever know it through what's offered by your senses. You can't ever know it for what it really is. It's always mediated by the senses. So what that is complete mystery. It's complete mystery. So the whole of the world, the whole way the world manifests, we don't know actually what it is. It's always completely mysterious. The whole physical form of the world is always only known through our senses. And then this whole physical form of the world is what gets called rupa in Buddhism, so form, anything that you perceive through the five senses, the physical senses. And if you've come across the idea of the 6-element practice, or even there's a 4-element practice as well, but how we experience the qualities of the world through our senses can be sort of divided up into the elements. Yeah, sort of always form sort of categories. It's to do with whether experiences of solidity and resistance, or liquidity and flow, or temperature, or movement and expansiveness. There are these different qualities that a daffodil, or a wing, or a candle offers, that we perceive, whilst what that form is itself is still unknown. But that solidity, or liquidity, or temperature, or movement, as I said, it's not a quality of the object itself, of which we're conscious. It's more a way of understanding consciousness itself. So don't worry if you're getting lost. Well, it doesn't matter if you're getting lost, it's fine. In Living with Awareness, Sangharakshita's book Living with Awareness, there's a whole section on the elements, which is really, really good. I was going to say I'd really recommend this book, but to be honest, I think the only section I've ever read is the bit on the elements. I've never managed to get onto the rest of the book, because I find the elements so brilliant. So it's almost these qualities of consciousness that we take and make into concrete things. But when we explore these qualities, so it's earth, water, fire and air, solid, liquid, temperature and movement, well, wind sometimes, we can see that those qualities, those very things out there also are what we're made up of. It's the same, and we can track the movement in and out of those same things or qualities. So whatever it is that we are as perceiving things is made of the same stuff as what's out there. And what I find interesting in Buddhism, as opposed to our Western worldview that arises out of just exploring this area, is that these elements that are out there, that are inside, are often seen as alive, as living. And if you think about it, if what is out there is in constant flux with what's in here, and if what's in here is somehow alive and conscious and perceiving, but there isn't necessarily any boundary because of this flux, then why is it we say, well, what's out there is inanimate, is not living? How come we say that? It's a way of thinking about it, but why do we assume that as the only way of thinking about it? So it just throws into question this whole idea of living me perceiving inanimate, non-living things and world. So this is beyond sort of life as in animals and trees. This is just everything alive. And if we start to allow ourselves to think like that, as an act of imagination, say, without having to insist on it being singularly true, it affects how we are in the world, and it affects what we are in the world, and it affects how we act in the world. Because if the world out there is alive, if what we think of as inanimate is actually animate in some way, because we can't call it non-life, then we start to have an experience of the moon and the sun and water and air and rocks and soil as having some sort of life or livingness to them. And then that means that we come into relationship with those things in a different way, because they are somehow alive. And it moves us into the whole realm of animism, where the world is alive. So again, Sangha actually touches on this in this section of the elements, and I just don't think we've even begun to unpack it. If something's alive, it starts to have a sort of personality, a sort of beingness to it. So with animistic traditions, a tree or a mountain or a lake or a river, each one has a unique personality or quality. And actually, if you go and explore things, they do, not just living beings but places, they have their own atmosphere and quality. So you can start to come into relationship with them as beings. And as you do that, you have a duty towards these beings. You have a duty towards them of non-violence. You have a duty to honour them, to take care of them, because they're alive, because you're alive and you're not separate. So with that perspective, if we think of this whole world, or this whole solar system, or this whole universe, we have a duty to care for it. And we have a duty, and that includes a duty to care for ourselves, but to only take what we need. Not more than we need. Just as an act of respect. So it seems kind of obvious to me, at least, that if we started to relate like this, we would not be doing what we're doing to the planet. So this multiplicity of visions, this cultivating of the imagination, this fluidity of seeing things, this allowing of possibilities, this dropping away of boundaries, this transgressing the kind of social kind of the culturally constructed views which say it's like this and not like that. This is actually really important. This is really important. And this isn't to do with our liberation, my heart being free. This is to do with the world being free. And actually any practice we do, by the same token, is the world awakening. It's not you or me or even us. It's just not separate.